Hey guys, welcome into Budget Bros MTG, where I try to build powerful decks that you can actually afford. Today, I'm going to be going over one of my most favorite lists that I've ever had the pleasure in helping build. This one is going to be for Kefka Court Mage. It is a collaboration that I did with Budget Pub Stomper here on YouTube or Navinod in our Discord. And I think that it is just about the best you can do with $100 in a Kefka deck. And I'd like to just take a deep dive and show you exactly why I feel that way. As always, if deck techs and introspective content on like philosophy of magic and things like that are something that you enjoy, a like and a subscription would be super appreciated. So kind of as a forward with you guys, I'm not going to mince words. We specifically set out to make this the absolute strongest that we could for $100. I didn't want a good Kefka deck or even a great Kefka deck. The goal in mind was to make the absolute best Kefka deck that you can do for $100. It took countless hours of research, tweaking, and min-maxing the budget, but I'm hard-pressed to believe that there is a way to make a better Kefka deck at $100, and I would be very happy to be proven wrong. Let's dig into why I feel that way, and hopefully you will too. So to start off, let's go with some pros, cons, and the general power level of the deck. This is specifically designed for $100 budget competitive. However, with that being said, it also sits very, very comfortably at high power, budgetless bracket 4 tables. It's able to hold its own against much more meta and expensive decks. And we didn't really need game changers to be able to do that, just due to the fact that it is kind of a synergy soup of a deck. I think you'll enjoy this deck if you enjoy reactive decks, slammed full of interaction. You like being the villain of your table and causing your opponents to discard their hands. Or if you prefer decks that are synergy forward and have interwoven combo lines. This probably won't be the deck for you if you're looking for a turbo list. This isn't the fastest deck. It looks to take the game into a longer state. However, it is able to make that a possibility very easily. If you don't enjoy constant interaction and prefer to sit back and take a more like battle cruiser or like Timmy big stompy approach of play, I don't think you'll enjoy this. Or if you're looking for a lower power and more casual list, I would not ever take this list into something less than a bracket 4. It's really not meant for it. Even the commander himself, just at base value, he can be a little bit brutal at bracket 3 or 2 tables. So I would stick to the higher power. I guess now would probably be a good time to actually go over what Kefka does. So he is 5 mana total, 2 generic, and then Grixis color symbols. He's a 4/5 human wizard, and he says whenever Kefka enters or attacks, each player discards a card. Then you draw a card for each card type among cards discarded this way. He does have an activated ability for 8 mana that lets you transform him. And on the flip side, it says, he has flying. And then whenever an opponent loses life during your turn, you draw that many cards. And I feel like there are builds out there for that. And I don't think it would be a bad deck that would build into that. It's just too expensive for our purposes here. And I personally I don't like that you miss out on the whole other aspect of the front face of the card where you're also making your opponents discard. Let's get into kind of an overview of why Kefka and why this deck in general. So Kefka Court Mage is a absolutely diabolically effective value engine in the command zone. So what makes him stand out to me over like other generic card draw commanders like Timna the Weaver, Crom, or Talion is the fact that while Kefka is inherently giving you a monstrous grip of cards every turn, he's also simultaneously shredding our opponent's hand. Every single time a Kefka trigger goes on the stack, we're going to be taking 3 cards collectively from our opponents and drawing anywhere from 2 to 4 ourselves. Every enter the battlefield effect, flicker, clone, or attack that Kefka performs is going to be like casting a mini Siphon Mind plus a Gitaxian Probe. The probe part may seem like a hot take, but let me kind of go into that a little bit further. So there are 2 different scenarios that happen when a Kefka trigger is on the stack. The first is our opponents will intentionally try to set us back on the draws by discarding things with the same card type. This is going to result in a discussion amongst them that gives you pretty valuable hand information. Examples like I can discard a land but not an instant, or all I have are creatures. Those give you an insight into your opponent's hand that you just didn't have before. This usually only happens the first 1 to 2 times we present a Kefka trigger, and it will result in less cards drawn, but the trade-off is invaluable game state knowledge. The second example of what happens and what generally happens after the first 1 to 2 times that you present a Kefka trigger is our opponents are going to try to be holding on to as much information as possible, or they've already ripped all the cards they're willing to part with out of their hand. When this starts to happen, this is when the card draw does pump up quite a bit. And then this is when we draw anywhere from like 3 to 4 cards each time as a result of that. So Kefka presents our opponents with it's a really unique and brutal lose-lose situation every single time he triggers. With that in mind, this deck in particular is specifically hyper-focused on maximizing the amount of triggers we can present throughout the game. All right, so let's go over a couple of the different ways that this deck plans to win. There are absolutely countless 3 and 4 card combos that you can either slip into or just accidentally assemble. But I'm going to go over like the big ones that we personally built around. Firstly would be the Rionia Fire Dancer plus Combat Celebrant combo. What this requires is for you to have both of them in play. Summoning Sickness won't matter. On the start of combat, Rionia is going to trigger. So Rionia says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create X tokens that are copies of another target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of instant and sorcery spells you cast this turn. They gain haste, and then you're going to exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Just at base value, you're always going to make 1 copy of Combat Celebrant. So at the start of the combat, Rionia is going to trigger, and she's going to make a minimum of 1 copy of Combat Celebrant. Combat Celebrant says, if Combat Celebrant hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, untap all other creatures you control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So you're going to exert the clone of Combat Celebrant on attack, netting an extra combat, and then you're going to wash, rinse, and repeat that. Since each new combat cycle is going to create a new copy of Combat Celebrant, that specific one has not been exerted this turn, which can keep the loop going. I'd also like to note that both of these cards just work absolutely fantastically with Kefka, all on their own. Next would be the absolute red staple of a combo, being Dual Caster Mage and Electro Duplicate. You're going to cast Electro Duplicate, targeting a creature that you control. Electro Duplicate reads, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this token. You're going to hold priority and cast Dual Caster Mage in response to your own Electro Duplicate. He's going to enter the battlefield and copy Electro Duplicate, targeting himself. And then that creates a loop where each new clone of Dual Caster Mage will come in. It'll copy the Electro Duplicate, and you can make an infinite amount of hasty tutus that can swing out and kill the table. There's also a cool post-combat variant of this that includes Mayhem Devil as well. So let's say that you went to combat, you didn't have all the nuts in hand before combat, you swung with Kefka, and now you have assembled the nuts in hand required. You can still win after combat. So the same one's going to use Dual Caster Mage and Electro Duplicate, but adds in Mayhem Devil, which is 3 mana, 1 generic, and Rakdos. It's a 3/3, but it says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, this creature deals 1 damage to any target. You're going to do the Dual Caster Mage loop by making an infinite amount of the hasty tutus, and then the end step clause will trigger for Electro Duplicate when you go to pass your turn that says at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this token. There's also an entire Hoarding Broodlord package tied into the deck. I'm not going to go super deep on this. If you want all the steps, you can go read the primer that I have written for it. But essentially, what is going to happen is you're going to create a tutor and infinite damage and infinite mana chain through Hoarding Broodlord and Saw in Half. By casting Saw in Half, targeting the Hoarding Broodlord, being able to grab more pieces, essentially boiling down to a loop of Lightning Bolt and Pinnacle Monk that will allow you to do infinite damage to the table. The last one that I'd like to touch base on is one that does include Kefka. And this is Dualcaster Mage plus Ghostly Flicker plus Kefka Court Mage. So you're going to cast Ghostly Flicker, which reads exile 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under your control. Same as with the Electro Duplicate, you'll hold priority on this cast, and then go to cast Dualcaster Mage. He's going to enter and copy Ghostly Flicker, targeting himself in a land. So now you can generate infinite mana, any color that your lands can produce. And then once you have the infinite mana, you can switch the targets to start flickering Kefka and the Dualcaster Mage. And then what this is going to do is allow us to draw our entire deck while also causing our opponents to discard all their cards. And you can just tutor up any way that you want to win from that point. I'd like to touch super quick base on just a couple of the different packages that we have available here, starting with interaction. So Spell Pierce, Siren Storm Tamer, Dispel, Miscast, Malevolent Hermit, Bolt Bend, and an Offer You Can't Refuse. These are all just going to be super solid 1-mana counters for controlling the game or protecting Kefka. Memory Lapse, Drown in the Lock, Delay, and Counterspell. I would say these are some of the best 2-mana counters for this budget. They say no to just about anything you're not really vibing with. Commandeer, Misdirection, and Flare of Duplication. Free counterspells are possible at a budget, if you know where to look. Essence Flux, Displace, and Ghostly Flicker. You can blink Kefka in response to an opponent targeting him with a removal spell. This creates a pretty awesome feels bad moment for your opponents, when not only are they not killing Kefka, but now they're also discarding a card while we draw another 2 to 4. Ghostfire Slice, Lightning Bolt, Rapid Hybridization, and Pongify, 1-mana removal. What more can you ask for? Abrade, Resculpt, Snapback, and Drown in the Lock. These are good all-rounder removal spells. Snapback can also be used as an emergency ripcord if someone tries to remove Kefka, and this will allow you to bounce him back to hand, allowing to recast on your following turn. Mayhem Devil. We have a pretty high density of creatures that explode themselves and cards that explode our creatures for us. And Mayhem Devil really shines in that environment. Early game, he's able to completely dismantle any strategies relying on mana dorks for ramp. Breath of Daragaz. This is just an awesome multifunctional, asymmetrical board wipe. Draw and tutors. Just pretend 99% of these cards that I talk about also say your opponent each discard a card. Essence Flux, Ghostly Flicker, Displace, and Electro Duplicate. These are single-use flickers for Kefka. Electro Duplicate is nice, as we can use it without having to worry about shutting off our own combo due to flashback. Azra, Oddsmaker. This is Budget Pub Stomper's pet card in here. It's been here since the beginning, and it's not leaving anytime soon. It is a great card, and it functions with or without Kefka to get more cards into our hand. Combat Celebrant, Go-Go Mysterious Mime, and Rionia Fire Dancer. These all function to maximize our Kefka triggers. More triggers equals more cards for us, and less for our filthy opponents. Tutors are pretty boring most of the time. If you need the card, they get the card. If there's a card, they find the card, they put it into your hand, they put it on the top of your library. The one I do like to highlight is going to be Final Parting. The fact that it can completely assemble a Hoarding Broodlord line by pitching Hoarding Broodlord into your graveyard and then putting a reanimation spell in hand goes really well. It also works outside of that to assemble any B to the A that you already have online. Ramp's not usually something that I go into in depth, but this deck was specifically designed around the notion to get a turn 3 Kefka out, or to be able to get a turn 4 Kefka out and be able to hold up interaction. You have a ton of options here for 1-mana ramp and turn 2 ramp that will create 2 or more mana for us to be able to get Kefka out turn 3 as consistently as possible. I want to do a special shout out to Generator Servant here. The fact that you can tap him to sacrifice him, add 2 colorless, And then if that mana is spent on a creature spell, it gains haste until the end of turn. What that allows us to do is not only curve into a turn 3 Kefka all by himself, but it allows us to present 2 triggers immediately, even with this deck being specifically designed around getting him out as early as feasibly possible. There is still definitely an argument to be made about casting him on turn 4 and being able to hold up interaction. Kefka's definitely getting a lot more attention recently, so kind of gauge out your table and see if you're going to be able to cast him turn 3 without him getting blown up by the time it gets back to you. And that's about it, guys. It was an awesome time building this deck and doing the collaborative process with Budget Pub Stomper. He has way more experience in this format than I do. I'm still pretty new in the scheme of things, and it was really cool being able to go back and forth between using the research that I was doing and his general experience in competitive play to make, once again, what I think is the absolute best deck you can make for Kefka at $100. I appreciate you guys staying and hanging out and letting me talk about a deck that is probably the most fun I have ever had piloting. If you enjoyed the video, once again, a like and a subscription are always super appreciated. I'm still a smaller channel, so every single bit helps. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening in. This has been Budget Bros MTG, and I'll see you next time.